So now that we finished looking at reference, it's time to do some sketching. So essentially I'm going to be doing 3 composition sketches based on the reference and the idea of a Japanese stilt city, a city that's built on the water, traditional Japanese homes, but we want to push it to feel more fantasy. So initially I'm going to be trying different scales of cities. So this one is a bit this one's a bit smaller. The one we end up going with is a much larger one, but I feel like it's good to try these out. So essentially the techniques are, I'm going to be thinking about foreground, midground, background, keeping it separated on layers, and essentially I'm going to be designing it just as silhouette shapes. So I find that this is a really good way to do like just quick sketching, because these silhouette shapes can just like inform a lot. And then when I'm doing this, I'm also thinking, do I want the lighting essentially coming from the left or the right? So I'm kind of thinking in 3-dimension, but sketching kind of flat. Where in my head I'm thinking about the architecture, thinking about how I'm going to be wanting things to be turning, but I'm not really doing a lot of indication. It's a lot based on silhouette, because I know I'm going to be using atmosphere and then my light direction to kind of guide this. So I've split it up. I'm adding like background mountain range, and then also like an additional layer of buildings in the back, so there's depth. And again, just kind of keeping it separate and simple. Doing some refining to the shapes, things like railings or like small people for scale are like the best ways to have scale. So this main building, I'm thinking the buildings in the midground that swoop around would be like 1 to 3 stories, probably like around 2-story buildings. And then the main building would be probably in like the 5 or 6-story range, or it could be like this really interesting stacked building structure, all based on Japanese buildings, maybe looking at some of those Japanese castles, but again, like having a lot of stilt indication. And for this one, this is going to be the one that we end up going with for final. I'm already just focusing on the main structure. Like, instead of like a smaller city that's also stacked, like, instead of like kind of like a village in the first one, what if we pushed it just bigger in scale, such as like a mountain where they built up onto it, like these stilt villages. And the little tick marks are like how I'm thinking about scale. These little dash marks kind of to me indicate like that this thing is really massive. And I'm testing out various like compositions here. Do I want the foreground on the left or the right? Do I want it to like swoop around from the right to the left? I already know I want like piers and docks for boats. And I want like various layers of buildings to that. As they go further back, I can put atmosphere in front of them. And I know I want that main mountain that's tall to be the focal point. I'm kind of just refining some of these shapes, thinking about like it's gonna be stilt, so I want to like keep some gaps in the silhouette. I want to make sure that all these elements kind of like work together and kind of have that like fantasy feeling. And I'm liking in this one the more fantasy feeling. And again, I'm doing this all in silhouettes because these shapes are going to be really important for the final image. There's a few ways you can do sketching. You can kind of do it with line drawing. You can obviously line drawing is really popular. You can do it this silhouette method. You could also do it just as black and white. And that is also a good way to think about light and shadow. And I'll kind of like flip-flop between sketching like this or sketching just in black and white, where it's more about light and shadow reads for things. But for a large scene like this, where I knew that the layers of the city would be really important, I thought this would be the best method for this. And I don't take it much further than just the simple silhouette shapes either, because I kind of already know I'm going to be building so much out in 3D that I'm going to do a lot of design solving there. And then this third composition, it's kind of like I wanted some middle ground between the first two, where again you have that foreground, you have like you'll have your main city on a mountain, but I was thinking more like the mountain would be a lot wider. It could have maybe like a Japanese castle on the top of it, and also have like those stilt elements, but then the cities they'd just be smaller in scale overall. And then the foreground would also be kind of like a rocky path with like a little bit of like a railing on it, so you would transition from this rocky foreground of the figure to this stilt city that's on the water. And then these shapes help me like also think about like the layering of the city, how the background fits into it. Testing out a slight composition difference, but so it's a little different than the second one, where maybe we can keep that swoop but we just change it up a little bit. And it doesn't need to be super detailed, like so the shapes are really rough, but when I see this I kind of know what I'm thinking about for buildings and foreground. And then this, I want to do also some studies for just silhouettes for some building groups. This is just like a good design exercise to kind of jump into, where, again, the silhouettes for these are really, really important. So how can we make like some interesting asymmetrical silhouettes that are based off like the stilt, and the stilt language mixed with like Japanese architecture, like form language. So I created a few shapes here for building groups, and then I'm just kind of like refining it. And also initially I was thinking that it could be cool to have like a mix of stilt and stone bases. I was thinking that initially, that a combination could be interesting, and I still do like it, but I ended up not really using much stone for the final piece. It was all built off the stilt language. So having things like railings and little people, and just like small shapes, is a great way to indicate scale when doing these silhouettes. So you want to kind of be mindful of that. So I'm spending some time just like also cleaning up some of these shapes too. Hanging rope as a way to break up the more stiff, like architectural look. And then, like any good kit bash, it's all about how are we going to combine these elements to make new elements. Because I knew I'd be doing this with my kit. I knew I could make buildings and then bash them around and then build on top of it to make like a very complex structure So essentially you could do the same thing with silhouettes. So this is what I was doing here, and I was able to get some fun, complex looking silhouette shapes. And then just going back in and refining a little bit more, just cleaning up certain things, making sure the scale cues read, trying to just think a little bit more about shapes. And this kind of like determines some stuff, like determining how some of the piers will look, how some of the wood boards will look. It's not like, it's just kind of like angles and supports and wires and wood. I love the vibe of these references on the top, so it's really fun to explore. So doing studies like this is a great way just to practice design, practice shape. So I would encourage anyone who's like thinking about like doing some designs to try it out in silhouette first. So then these are the final silhouettes. And then from here we're going to take these ideas and we're going to start moving into the 3D kit bash phase, which is really important part of my workflow. 3D is so important and so powerful these days that I use it in pretty much almost everything that I do now. I use it on a daily basis for work, and it's extremely powerful. So we'll see you in the next section.